to all our guests, Swiss Re colleagues, and of course our guest speaker, Daniel Staib, on this what is a cool day in Johannesburg. It's really a great pleasure to serve as your host and moderator of this Swiss Re Corporate Solutions webinar on a topic which is so relevant to all of us, individually and of course as representatives of our organizations. The South African economy after COVID, are there reasons to be optimistic? So for those who don't know, I have the pleasure of taking care of this team in South Africa. My name is Michelle Oosthuizen, and I'll be serving as your moderator and your host today. It's a real treat, as I said, to be joined by so many of our clients and our brokers, and of course our corporate friends. Thank you very much for making time for us today. Reflecting on 2020, it's truly been a remarkable year in so many ways. It still feels like I'm going to wake up one day thinking that it's all been a terrible dream, but that's clearly not going to happen. Even so, I personally remain curious about what the future holds, and that is why I'm so excited that Daniel has made the time to share his thoughts with us on whether we should have hope, whether we should have a sense of optimism about the post-COVID South Africa economy. So thank you once again for all of you who are joining us as we speak, and those who've already dialed in. It's really a session that I've been looking forward to for many weeks to come. Before we get into the presentation, just a couple of logistical details, if I may. To make sure everybody can hear the speaker, can I please ask you to mute yourselves? Also, just to bear in mind that we are recording the session and we'll be sharing the recording with you afterwards. Also, we'd like this to be interactive, so please feel free to reach out at any stage with your questions. If you have a question during the presentation, you've got a couple of options. One is you can type the question in the text box at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, or you can then just voice your question and we'll respond to it as we go along. Also, if you've got any technical difficulties, which typically does tend to occur, please feel free to just dial in again. That should address the challenges that you face. Daniel will also ask questions throughout the presentation using Slido. So please, can I ask you to have your phones ready? As I understand it, the link to Slido will be in the side bar, the screen. You can have a look at the screen on the side. In the chat box, you should be able to see the link for Slido. So that's all I really wanted to say by way of introduction, and to address some of the logistical issues. I also want to make a few comments and remarks about Daniel, who we have as our guest speaker today. He is a senior economist and data research lead at the Swiss Re Institute, and he joined Swiss Re in 2006, some 14 years ago. He's also the author of the infamous annual World Insurance Sigma series and several other publications, including Insurance in Emerging Markets, Overview and Prospects for Our Islamic Insurance, and Insurance in Sub-Saharan Africa, Growth Stutters, Fundamentals are Strong. He has a real special interest in and flair for analyzing insurance and reinsurance markets and macroeconomic environments in emerging markets. Currently, I believe he is focusing on Sub-Saharan Africa and has previously analyzed Central and Eastern Europe and the Middle Eastern region. He holds a degree in economics from the University of Zurich. So to you, Daniel, a dear friend and colleague, a very warm welcome. Always a pleasure to share a virtual stage with you. So over to you to share your thoughts and insights with us on this extremely interesting and relevant and timely, of course, topic. Thanks, Daniel. Over to you.
Thank you, Michelle, for the kind introduction and a warm welcome from also called Switzerland, and very grey Switzerland, I have to admit. So the topic post-COVID-19, are there reasons to be optimistic about the South African economy? And before I present my own view, I would like to feel the pulse in the audience with a short poll, and like you to go to slido.com, or you take up your mobile phones and scan the QR code above on the slide, which takes you the first question. And I'll start the poll now. The question is, simply choose one word which describes how you feel about the outlook for South Africa post COVID-19. Can also be a word combination, not a sentence. So we take some times, again, slido.com, or use the link in the chat, which takes you directly to the poll. The event code, in case you missed it, is SA2021. And maybe Linda, you can show the results. Already 6 coming in. We have more participants on the line, so we may want to wait a few more seconds. Okay, we take from this clearly not such an optimistic view, nervous, cautious, worried, concerned, negative and depressed. So quite a negative view on the situation. So there's one optimist coming up. That's nice. South Africans tend to be very optimistic. So that's great to see. So let me go back to the presentation with this first poll. Good. Sorry, I need to switch screens here. Just a second. Good. So I choose, to summarize my view, I choose these pictures. You may guess it. This is me. You just have to think away the dirt on my face, on my arms. A picture was taken back in 2017 at the Joburg to Sea, where I participated together with 3 colleagues from Swiss Re. For those who don't know, the Joburg to Sea, it's a 900-kilometer, 9-day mountain bike race across South Africa from Johannesburg to Durban. The scenery along the way as you go through the different states is absolutely stunning and shows the absolutely beauty of this country. So why did I choose these pictures? I think it shows a bit in a picture what I expect for the outlook. So first of all, the event itself is a sign for a positive development. So besides offering mountain biking, really aim to support the local and rural communities along the way in the different stops. And there in particular, they focus on donating to schools, education institutions, libraries, and so on. And I think this is one of the key aspects which will be crucial to lift South Africa to a higher growth rate, to bring up education levels, improve education, particularly in the the low income areas. Then second symbol, just like South Africa, the Joburg to Sea has been hit by COVID-19. The 2020 edition, which was in April, May, needed to be cancelled. Obviously, it's unclear how many people will return next year because there's a lot of international participants as well. So there's a drag on this side. And in the end, the money that was donated to the community in previous years is missing. So there is a loss. And that's one of the key aspects of the current situation. But then thirdly, there's a smile, and I would say it's cautious optimism, but it stands for optimism. I think there's reasons to be optimistic, but as you can see by the dirt in the face and on the arms and all over the place, it's going to be a hard journey. To take the analogy, to speed up the economic recovery of South Africa, it will be hard work, and hands and faces will get dirty. To take the analogy of the race, it is physically demanding. You need to have a long breath, and there will be technical difficult trails, and you're likely to crash. But the important thing is to quickly get up again and keep on racing and finish the job. So that's my view on the South African economy in the short place. To translate it a bit, it means first and foremost, the goal is to restore the competitiveness and attractiveness of South Africa as an investment destination for internationally, but for local investors, and as the gateway to Africa. Address the electricity shortage, improve infrastructure, improve ease of doing business, and implement the many plans that are around, and gathering the political support is certainly the crucial part of this. So with this, I would go a bit more into detail over the next 20 minutes, and I would start off by a quote and the first claim: COVID-19, the worst is behind us, but no return to normality anytime soon. I will explain you a little bit what I mean. And I brought a few charts to show you this. And here on the left side, you can also see an infamous chart, which we have seen many times over the past half years. It shows 7-day moving average of daily infections per 100,000 people in South Africa. We're all very familiar, but I would like to take a step back and look a bit at the big picture. So what we really can see is that after the peak in July and August, infections have come down significantly and have stabilized right now at low levels. In fact, they're almost 10 times lower than at the peak of the pandemic in July and August. So that's the good news. On the right-hand side, you have the Swiss Re Institute Pandemic Macro Clock. Excuse me. This is a tool that we have developed to monitor the link between the pandemic and the economy. On the vertical axis, you can see the reproduction rate, RT, of the virus. If RT is above 1, it means infections are growing exponentially, and the goal is really to keep RT below 1. On the horizontal axis, you can see the measure of lockdown severity, which is a combination of how stringent the lockdown measures are. In the case of South Africa, the different lockdown measures from 1 to 5. But then we also look at mobility. So how strictly are the lockdown measures adhered to? So it's not only the formally declared lockdown, but also basically the effective lockdown. On this chart, a move to the left means that lockdown measures are easing and mobility is picking up, and towards the right, the opposite is the case. And the theory is that along this round arrow, circular arrow, country moves through the different quadrants. So starting in level in the quadrant 1 on the top right, on the 12th of March is the first data point. So we had high RT, strongly growing infections from a very low level at that time, as we can see. And then we gradually move with the implemented lockdown measures formally on the 23rd of March to the right, and also reproduction numbers come down. But then we can see it's not an idealistic circle we go through. So people are not always adhering and the RT is coming up again. But effectively, through steering the different measures, South Africa was getting into the sweet spot in the third field, where basically we can ease restrictions and reproduction rate is low. And this, the last point, and that's very important, you see the orange, I think it's a triangle, it's a dot, which is the last data point. It's a little bit in the red area, but it's very close to 1. So a relatively contained situation. Obviously, the government in South Africa is looking at the developments also very closely. And in contrast to Europe, where we're heading into the cold winter, which is typically more difficult to contain a virus because we spend more time indoors. In South Africa, going into the summer, and that should make it difficult, more easy to contain the virus. Also, there's a tremendous amount of research around how COVID-19 can be contained. A lot of research is done, and we'll learn more over the next few years, which certainly also help South Africa. However, it does not look like the pandemic is over just yet, and it will take a whole while until measures will finally disappear from our lives. And this will likely only happen if we have a vaccine widely available. We had very positive announcement by Pfizer during this week, but again, it's not yet approved, and it will take time until it's produced and distributed, and only then we'll move to more normal times. So the uncertainty for companies and residents in South Africa and in the rest of the world will prevail for some more time. And the main affected sectors are those with high personal interactions where large crowds gather, will suffer for some time. Entertainment industry, restaurants, travel, also education and sports. So this is here to stay for quite some time. So let's look at this monitoring tool also across countries, just to give you a bit of view that you're actually doing much better in South Africa in relation to COVID-19 at this point in time. When you look at the left chart, you again have this macro clock, and you probably can pick out the different countries. So DE is Germany, CH is Switzerland, Italy, Canada, GB, and so on. And you can see they're really in this red zone to the left, but some countries have again introduced tightening. You can see the measures that are implemented now do diverge quite dramatically. So we can see on the one hand, France, which has a very strict lockdown where you can only move outside for essential work and a restricted area around your home. On the other hand, I'll take Switzerland as example, which is further up, but less tight in terms of restrictions. Where it's less restricted and government restaurants are still open. There's social distancing measures, masks need to be wear everywhere, but very different views to deal with the crisis. And the goal, and what will be the goal be for South Africa also next year, is to control this second wave and to make sure the health systems are not overloaded. On the right side, you can see same daily new cases per 100,000. You can see we're basically in Switzerland in the midst of this second wave. And right now, you can see a bit of a flattening off, but it's not yet clear if the measures that have taken will help to contain this. And for all the other countries, where in a similar fashion, travel will be restricted, and this will effectively have a negative impact on the economic recovery in the advanced markets. Why is this important? Obviously, in terms of tourism, I mean, South Africa has opened its borders for selected countries, but on the one hand, South Africa does not want to invite infected persons to South Africa. And on the other hand, in an environment where the virus is again surging, people are reluctant to book their vacation and to commit to a travel if they're not sure that they really can go. So this will drag on tourism in South Africa, which is one big contributor to South Africa GDP and also FX revenues, and also on exports in case the new lockdowns introduced, for example, in Europe, have severe negative effect on the economy. So with this, I would like to move on to the next topic and just show you the impact of the lockdowns. Certainly, the lockdowns have helped to contain the virus, but they also have resulted in deep to very deep recessions, basically unknown contractions across the globe. As any week of lockdowns and business closure is a week of foregone business and production. On the left side, we have the index of the University of Oxford, which measures the stringency of lockdowns, which you can see in this chart. The higher the value, the more measures are in place and the stricter the lockdown measures. The red line represents South Africa, and I have added a few European countries and Brazil, another emerging market, for comparison. In light of the fact that the virus reached Africa and South Africa with some delay, the government has responded very quickly and decisively and put in place a very restrictive and one of the most strictest lockdowns for a very long time compared to other countries. It has helped to limit the spread of the virus, but there's huge negative consequences, which you can see on the right side, where we have it's not the GDP in this sense, but it's an economic capacity shortfall index, which is based on mobility measures, which correlates quite well with GDP. You can see the red line again, South Africa, the huge drop in the maximum of about 25%, which basically says there's a shortfall compared to the pre-crisis levels of about 25%. And if you average over the second quarter, you get to a very similar level to the 17% drop year on year for the second quarter GDP that South Africa. And what you can see is that the drop in GDP was as severe as for the UK, which was one of the most hardest hit countries in Europe, and also that the recovery has been only gradual. Most recently, it is outpacing the UK, South Africa, but at the far right, at the most current level, you can see that there's a gap in output. So GDP level has been recovering over the whole time, but there's still some gap left, so we're still lower than pre-crisis. So, for example, in September, when we look at manufacturing production in South Africa, this is still down by about 2.6% versus September 2019. So still some gap, and then obviously service sectors would be more affected. So that was the current situation, and now let's think a bit more about the big picture, which I would like to start with my second claim. And I mentioned it already in introduction. We are really experiencing the sharpest and possibly the shortest and hopefully the shortest recession of our lifetime. And I will show you this in a few charts. First one on the US, and then I will move on to South Africa. First of all, we're in a very unusual global recession. In fact, the crisis we are experiencing right now has very different dynamics than any other crisis we've seen before over the last 50 years plus. A typical recession starts from a downturn which intensifies to a full-blown crisis, and that can take quite a while. However, in this instance, COVID-19 was what we call an external shock, which basically hit almost the entire world at the same time. And with the lockdown measures, there was an unprecedented speed of economic contractions, and basically all the economic charts you look at are off the chart because the contraction is so severe compared to all the history. It is more severe than the global crisis if you look at the overall economy, which you can see in the chart on the right side. The red line is the quarterly GDP growth for the US in this case, in the current crisis and our forecast, and compared to the financial crisis in blue. We have almost more than 2 times stronger drop of GDP, but we can also see that the recovery is stronger than what we've seen before. A second factor is there's an unprecedented degree of uncertainty. We have learned a lot over the past year. There has been a lot of research being conducted about the crisis, but we still don't know how it will unfold. And to take the case of Switzerland, in late September, everybody thought, yeah, it looks pretty good in Switzerland. We have it under control. And then in October, cases started to explode again, and we're in a completely different situation. So the uncertainty and the amount of uncertainty is enormous, and this will remain for quite some time. So the good news is this will also be likely to be one of the shortest recessions of all time, as a recession is defined as a contraction in GDP, and on the previous slide that you've seen, the curve is already sloping up again, so meaning each quarter is better than the previous quarter. So economic activity has troughed in April and has been expanding since. So technically we were already in the recovery and will get better, but we'll not get quite to pre-crisis level. And that I would like to show you at the case of South Africa. So for South Africa, we do expect the economy to contract around 9% over the whole year in 2020, which is in line with other institutes. Some see even a stronger contraction, and basically it also depends on how the recovery this year will unfold. But after this 17% drop of GDP versus the previous year's GDP, we see now a rebound in the second half of 2020 and 2021. However, as we already said, the rebound is incomplete. So it means South Africa will not recover all output lost. And this you can see on the right side in the line chart, where you see the real GDP index to 2019 for 100. You can see the big drop in 2020, and then a relatively strong rebound, about 5% for next year. But the growth path after COVID-19 is below the one we had before, and it will take a couple of years until output is pre-crisis output was regained. So beyond this immediate rebound, we are a bit more cautious because of pre-crisis growth was very weak. Basically, on a per capita basis, real GDP stagnated for the past 4 years in South Africa, and the structural deficiencies and the need for consolidation will clearly a drag going forward. On this, more later. Before I move to the next section, I would like to feel again the pulse in the audience, and would like to invite you to go back to Slido, and you should still see the page. And the next question is basically, are you more or less optimistic than we are for the economic recovery of South Africa? For this, I will go back to this slide, so you have to reference what we see as a path. Now we have shared. So big contraction and gradual recovery for the next years. Please make the selections into multiple choice questions. Oh, wait, I need to go to the next slide. Sorry. Okay. Are you more or less optimistic for the economic recovery of South Africa? And then a much stronger rebound, somewhat stronger, or weaker, much weaker? Interesting to hear what Okay, see how this unfolds. We have 14, which is pretty good. So yeah, we're a crowd of pessimists in the room, it seems. So you're even more concerned than I am. At least 20% have similar. That optimists are jumping in later. They take a bit more time to come back in. So if you take the somewhat stronger, much stronger, yeah, it almost balanced the optimists and the pessimists in the room, and that's great. So let me go back to the presentation. Share the content again. Oops. There's a bit, again, technical issue here, sorry. Sorry. Can you see the slides again?
Yep, okay. We can see them. All good, okay. Daniel.
Good. Okay, so balanced, more pessimistic, some of the same. The reason I think for this is there's basically known what is needed in South Africa to spur up growth, but the implementation of these plans requires on the political agreement within the ruling party and within the government. And however you judge this situation, you can be more or less optimistic. My point is a bit, if change is not possible in a situation like this, after such a huge shock, when will it happen? Now. But on top, I think there's positive developments of the past few years, for example, in the area of addressing corruption, which lead that there will be progress being made, and that the country will come on a more sustainable and stronger growth path going forward. So here I've outlined a few of the key aspects that need to be implemented to transfer the country on a quicker growth path. And I mentioned the political support, which will be challenging to achieve, but President Ramaphosa's most recent economic recovery and reconstruction plan gives room for optimism as it addresses some of the key issues, but also on the short term with short-term measures and long-term ones. So first and foremost, for quite some time until you have this vaccine, containing COVID-19 will remain a key task. During summer, it will be a bit easier for South Africa due to a slower spread of the virus. But a negative factor, obviously, is the international situation with surges in Europe, where we see tourism also to South Africa remaining depressed for some time. A second key point is infrastructure. First and foremost, lack of electricity. Over more than 10 years, basically, electricity production has stagnated. And I mean, you know much better the effects of load shedding on a daily basis, but particularly for the industrial sector, this is a huge detraction to investments. If you have a steel mill and you don't know if you had to get power to heat your steel mill, you will not invest in a country. So this is an area that needs to improve, and I think also in the area of renewable power, with the different programs which have been quite successful in the past, and if they reinvigorated, they can bring improved power for South Africa. But also transport, communication, digital infrastructure need a ramp up. A third, and probably the most important one, is structural economic reforms. The power of unions, inflexible labor markets, red tape, and the cost of doing business, which has increased over the past few years. This needs to be improved, and with this also improve international competitiveness. Fourth, a big topic is the very high income and wealth inequality. And here, this is really also a long-term journey. If the cake is shrinking because an economy is contracting, there's less of the pie that you can redistribute for income inequality purposes. So here I would lump in also the really improve the education system for the poor, and to come up with education that skills young people to match the needs of the economy. And the fifth point, and I think here a lot of progress has been made since President Ramaphosa is in charge, is to improve and restore institutions in South Africa. Internationally, many of South Africa's institutions, such as the central bank, which is very independent, has a very good reputation, the treasury, the judiciary system, the independent media are assets for the country. But the increase in corruption during the Zuma years needs to be improve. Government efficiency needs to improve, and this will take quite some time. And this will also apply to the state-owned enterprises such as Eskom or South African Airways, which are a huge drain on government finances. So we have positive developments in many areas, I believe, but it will be quite a long struggle and a continuing struggle to implement these plans and continue moving on these targets. And the concerning factor is really that all these tasks, which are difficult if you have enough resources, are even worse in light of the surging government debt. So you can see on the left side the government debt levels for South Africa, which has basically increased in 2008 and is now at the level which for an emerging market is very high, and which is also the reason why all the downgrades of sovereign debt ratings to junk levels have happened, and this restricts the room to invest in the economy that the government has. And on the right side, I just put the country risk rating. So to attract investments on an international basis, the operational environment needs to improve in South Africa. And you can see this has been deteriorating for a number of years and recently has been improving, but we're still on a weaker level than before the crisis. So this will need to improve further. And to go to my next slide before I conclude, the reason why I think I'm optimistic is that South Africa's strong institution and an innovative corporate sector can be the key components to lead to a higher growth path. But these structural economic reforms in particular need to be speed up and are crucial to leverage the private sector and kind of start a virtuous circle where you have private sector investments coming in, financing, for example, infrastructure, but also creating jobs. This will increase economic growth overall, and due to a higher stronger growth momentum, the relative burden of government debt will be reduced over time. And that, again, gives more reasons for longer term improvement and will lead this vicious circle that South Africa can get on a more positive growth trajectory. With this, I would go to my next slide, and after I ask your opinion, I just want to focus on your company. Is your company planning to invest in the South African economy? Please go back to Slido and I activate the next poll. Good. Is your company planning to invest in South African money? No, less than in the past, about the same as in the past, more in the past, or much more in the past. That's F11. Let's wait a few more minutes. Maybe some more optimists come in at the end as for the second poll we had. That's actually quite. Oh no, this time the pessimists are rather late. But still, we see that there's, in contrast to the quite pessimistic view on the economic environment, there's more, rather a plan to invest more in the economy. Thanks a lot for this interesting feedback. I need to go back to the presentation and slide the presentation. Sorry, share the presentation. Good. So this was our last pulse, and let me just finish off and wrap off before I hand back to Michelle for a Q&A with some of the key messages from my past 20 minutes. So first of all, this will be one of the sharpest and possibly the shortest recession of our lifetimes. And yeah, if the recovery continues in Europe, it looks a bit like we'll have a double dip, so basically a speed bump in the recovery. But overall, we still think that the worst is behind us. We have some positive news on the vaccine front, which can help to get to normalize the situation over the midterm. But still, uncertainty will remain high until a vaccine is widely available globally before we can go back to more normal way of doing business and interacting. For South Africa, it's also on the recovery phase. It's a lagged recovery, still a gap to pre-crisis level. And the further recovery and the sustained recovery really depends on the implementation of the structural economic reforms and infrastructure ramp-ups in investments. And these are really needed to lift the growth trajectory from the past, where investment of the private sector was very low and economic growth overall was very low. So the country can, again, growth can be enabled and increased through private sector investments. with this, I would hand back to Michelle, and I think we go to the Q&A session.
Excellent. All right, Daniel, thank you so much for a job very well done. It's really been an interesting and insightful account of the post-COVID economy in South Africa. Of course, you've shared with us some sobering facts and figures that evidence the fact that although the worst seems to be behind us, normality is still a long way ahead of us. Just one key theme that stood out for me, which gives me a sense of optimism, is your reference, Daniel, to Africa's strong institutions and its innovative corporate sector that will be key to achieving a higher growth path. So thank you very much. Sobering indeed, but some silver linings that I think I took out of the presentation. Hopefully our guests also picked up on those positive pieces of information. Anyway, we don't have that much time for a Q&A, but let's kick off and hear from you if you do have some questions. We've got a couple of options here. One is you can unmute your phone and ask your questions personally, which I would encourage. Otherwise, you can write your questions in the chat window on the right-hand side of the screen. If you really need to drop off sharply at 2:45, then you can, of course, send some emails to either myself or any of the organizers, and we'll be happy to field those questions offline. But let's start with a Q&A. As I said, two options. Just unmute the phone, or otherwise just drop me a question in the chat box, and then I'd be happy to just read that to Daniel and get his view on those questions.
Michelle, if I may just jump, it's Andre Yatsenya from Switzerland. Do you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear,
Yes.
Andre.
Okay, good. Daniel, it was great to see you on the bike, and I couldn't vote, but I would be also more optimistic. Quick question. About 10 years ago with Reta Schnarr-Willer and some other colleagues of him, we were doing a risk model and risk map for another country. Do you have an opportunity to do a risk model for one of the municipalities, for example, for Buffalo City municipality, which could show and quantify what could be done at the municipality level to improve the climate for private sector investments? What will be the cost, the benefits? So then if there is an international multilateral support and Swiss support, which is now proposed for this municipality to make it smart investment for this smart city development, then it could be measured and could be then evaluated whether the underwriting criteria and the model indeed provide the clear path forward for the institutional reforms and some other activities that would enable private sector investment in this municipality, which is not the easiest to do in South Africa. So if it could be done there, maybe it could be done in other places. Over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm not familiar with what Reto has done, but we will need to look at this in more detail, what could be done on such a detailed level. I mean, what we see from the insurance side based to the COVID crisis is that due to the tight government deficit, also insurance solutions come into play when managing natural disasters such as earthquakes or floods and so on. So there's much more awareness for such institutions on a governmental level. For your other question, I think we would need to look at what could be concretely be done in this area.
Thank you. I think
Thanks.
we could connect and follow up, because I think that will be critical for the private sector, despite all this gloom, to see that there is a ray of hope, like on your biking trip. And then we could see whether indeed it could be quantified, like in the corporate risk officer, looking for the corporation, what measures could reduce the risk and improve the profitability, the same at the municipality level. Thank you so much for organizing this. Back to you, Michelle.
Thanks.
Thanks for your question, Andre, and certainly an interesting topic that you raised there. Are there any other questions that anybody on the call would like to raise? I've got one or two on the chat line that's come through, but I just want to give anybody an opportunity to raise them in person. If not, then one that's come through, Daniel, is how does the current situation affect demand for insurance?
Yeah, good question. Yes, thanks. I mean, on the uncertainty, the high and elevated uncertainty is certainly something that has raised risk awareness with private individuals, but also corporations to review their risk situation. So that's a positive side in this area, that we see increased demand. I mentioned the example also of government institutions, that they see the need to manage net cat risk, for example, in a more a way that creates opportunities for insurance. And then also the different drivers to the crisis. You had like digitalization, which has been pushed forward, which has also really pushed innovation in the sector right now, which will help in marketing digital solutions going forward. So that's another factor. And then a third factor, which I would like to mention on the positive side, is that the diversification of supply chains. So we had this model of everything is coming from one country in Asia where we source all our data. This has broken down during the crisis, and now there's a diversification ongoing. And related to that, there will be investments in supply chains, manufacturing, transport infrastructure, in many other areas, and that should also support demand for insurance. In the immediate sense, it has certainly been a drag, the drop in GDP that has a negative effect, but not as much as we have expected up to now in 2020.
Thanks, Daniel. Very interesting, and I would agree with your sentiments there. I think there certainly are opportunities for insurers to step in and to support in the recovery process. Also, just a comment here by one of our guests, we don't have a sense of how interactive the private sector is with government economic planning, but this surely should be one of the top agenda items for South Africa, and I certainly would agree with that comment by one of our guests. I could keep going for the rest of the afternoon, but I know sadly we've limited this to 45 minutes and we've overrun slightly. So I would encourage those who still have questions to send those emails through to us, or even to trickle them through on the chat line. We'll pick up on those and respond as soon as we can. But I do owe a debt of gratitude to you, Daniel. I think you've done a remarkably good job. It's been such a pleasure to see you on the call and to hear from you what your thoughts are on this topic. And then, of course, to our audience as well, we appreciate your attendance and your participation in the form of questions. I hope you found the presentation as interesting and insightful as I did. Also to our corporate solutions colleagues and our comms team, thank you to Stephanie and Linda who made it all happen. This doesn't happen by chance. We have people behind the scenes who work really hard to put events like this together. And then just perhaps a final comment from my side. Are there reasons to be optimistic? And for us at Swiss Re Corporate Solutions, there are many reasons to be optimistic. And I have a question, exclamation mark behind the word optimistic when I say that. For one, we're on the verge of obtaining our own direct insurance license, a big deal for us, and we've worked really hard to get that close to the finishing line, which is just weeks away. We also continue to grow the team. We have top talented individuals on the team, and we continue to expand and to attract individuals who we believe will help us to sculpt and create a future for this brand in South Africa. And then last but certainly not least, there's real excitement about the expansion of our value proposition. So with effect from 1 January 2020, we'll be offering international program business. The wind remains in our sails as we strengthen our presence and further expand our offerings in South Africa, which is further evidence of our strong commitment to this very important market. So when I looked at the numbers, Daniel, and to our colleagues on the call, and saw that 33%, 1 in 3, are going to be investing almost the same or even more in South Africa, I felt very encouraged. We have decided to do just that. We feel optimistic about the future, and we think we've got a brand, a group of people, and a value proposition that'll help us to establish ourselves and build a sustainable business here in South Africa. So I leave you with a final thought, if I may. Although we all have a part to play in the recovery of the economy, private enterprise, public sector, and individuals alike, there is always also going to have to be an element of acceptance and resilience. As someone once said, life is not about waiting for the storm to pass, but rather learning to dance in the rain. And I think that's a powerful quote that can help us to get through these troubled times, enjoy the experience to the extent that we can, but also look to the future and latch onto some of the positive insights and observations that Daniel has shared with us. So with that, I'd like to just wrap it up. Wish you an enjoyable rest of the day, and then once again to sincerely thank everybody who made this possible and who joined us today for this very interesting webinar. Thank you so much to everybody. Have a lovely afternoon, and we'll send to you the recording and a short survey. If you need to distribute that recording further, please feel free to do so. So thank you very much from my side in a cold Johannesburg. Have a lovely afternoon. And we'll see you sometime soon. Thank you very much.